you're talking about 20 years ago, 9/11 happened. That's quite a lot of time. Like, kids that were just born in there, they're almost able to drink now. In the States and Canada, they can drink. So what are some changes you've seen in the field of history that have taken place? Anything notable?
It's funny that you should say that, you know, it's so American that we like measure how old somebody is by their being able to imbibe alcohol. You know, in my experience, drinking age has never stopped anyone. And I live in Massachusetts, so it's actually not the drinking age, it's the able to buy pot legally age. So that's important.
I guess that is a big change now. People can legally buy pot, and 20 years ago, you get thrown in jail for it.
Yeah, God help, you know, so yeah.
I'm not sure if that really relates to the field of history, though.
No, but it does relate a lot to, I think, our mentality as a society, and it's a big change. Also to my students' ability to stay awake, had I have students right now in the classroom, or at least to tolerate me. Anyway, so in all seriousness, though, the biggest change I've seen is in history, especially in my own field of medieval studies, is the adoption of critical race theory, and critical race theory as a lens. And I think that, and I'm not saying this in like a Republican, you know, oh my God, they're teaching critical race theory, but the entire idea, like we're talking before about representation in history, that comes from critical race theory, or even asking questions about race. That's a big change, because it used, you know, a generation ago, people were like, women's history, we need to know about women's history. Why are women important, right? And then like Riding on Time, right? I have pitifully few women in that book because I couldn't really, you know, I've struggled to write women in because so many of the people who got credit for the inventions and everything, who are remembered by the historical record, were men. And so, you know, talking about, but certainly like in the industry, right, the radium girls, right, female clockmakers, things like that, you know, that, and it felt, but it's to such a point like that, it felt weird and awkward that has such a male history, right? That's something that's been kind of baked into us. And certainly a lot of the stuff I do, like the fencing stuff, the sword fighting texts, is in many ways very masculinist, which isn't to say that women are not present. I have female fencers, a print of female fencers actually on the wall opposite me that you can't see. And I have a whole talk I do, and you can find the YouTube video of it, on women in fencing, right? And women, you know, in Swords Women.
Parent Trap. Movie Parent Trap. They got some female fencing in there.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah. But more than just Parent Trap. It just, the oldest fencing book we have is from like about 1325, has a female fencer in it, right? So there's, you know, a long history of representation. So, you know, talking about that, even something that's, you know, seems so male and masculine, it's hard not to talk about women in it, right? It feels weird. And that in the same way, because that's like so been baked into me, right, over the course of my education, my career, to such a degree that it's just like one of those questions that instantly springs to mind about whatever, right? How does it relate to gender roles? How does it relate to women? You know, that's just something that is just there. And then now we're starting to say, well, what about race and concepts of race? And that can be dangerous and different from gender roles, because of course, there have always been women, and there have always been men. And I would argue there have probably always been people who have been trans to one degree or another, because the image behind me is actually a trans fencer from the late 18th century. Up top, I've got an image of actually a trans fencer fencing a fencer of African descent. I can't really say African American because he's not African or American. Is Chevalier Saint George, who is Haitian and European descent, and he, by asking questions of race, right, and even though race was differently construed in many ways in the past, and sometimes the questions people ask, I have to say, are not apropos or are anachronistic to the mentalities, back in the day, right? Because race is not, one thing that critical race theory, if you read critical race theory, and I've taught at least, a cursory version of critical race theory, is that ideas of race are socially constructed. Not so long ago, the Irish were a different race. Now the Irish are white, right? Jews, right? We were there, we were like a great test case because we were the other, and we were raced in the Middle Ages, and we were, the most preeminent other. And today, of course, we're considered white. So but of course, people of African descent, right? That's one of our huge concerns in our modern society, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, right? Front and center, it's real, it's here, it's urgent. Hard to write that into the medieval past, when certainly there are images of Africa and Africans and knowledge of Africa and Africans, much more so, of course, in the Dar al-Islam and the lands bordering the Muslim world than in France, Holy Roman Empire, British Isles themselves. Certainly that, but it wasn't really as front and center or as urgent in their society as in our society, there's a big change, of course, once the Portuguese voyages exploration began, and the first cargo of enslaved Africans came to Lisbon in about 1420, I believe. And then things changed greatly, and then you start seeing a lot more representation of Africans in art and in different ways. But it's hard to if you're a Chaucer scholar, or doing medieval English literature, or you're doing the Capetians or something like that, fields which are arguably important that need to be studied, to really argue that much of race into it. You can certainly find things, right? But it's going to be small and rare representations. In some cases, it's going to be a stretch. But we can find some things, and we can get some ideas of attitudes and ideas of towards Blackness, certainly. But should we center that in our study of the Middle Ages? It's hard, because it's hard to argue that that in a sense that we need to treat the distant past, as another country, right? And it's, in a sense, it's a form of imperialism to write our own concerns into their past, into their society. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What is it? Historicizing the past, kind of projecting backwards, taking our current problems and writing them into a place where they didn't really exist, to try and make arguments for the present, is kind of what you're getting at.
And there's an irony to that, right? And there's a definite irony to that, because we rely on arguing that what we're doing is important to the now to receive our funding, right? To receive our tenure track jobs, to receive the whatever we want, right? If you're just interested in the arms and armor of the Byzantine Empire or something, no big deal, right? That's not something anyone's going to have a tenure track job in, and it's going to be like a bunch of hobbyists, and there's going to be someone out there, in the arms and armor community who's a historian is much, much looser. But you're not going to get a job at a university doing that stuff.
So all of this is kind of touching on some of the complications in the field of history. Just to quick summarize the last question that I asked, some of the bigger changes that you've noticed in the field are the lenses of perception that are being used to address historical topics. Correct? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and the inclusion of race is not just one topic, but perhaps I would say in many ways the most important topic. And it's related also to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the university, and the mandates for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the university, which is, a very important thing. I'm not going to put that down, right? That's something that's very, very important. But it's hard to argue it's really hard to argue the continuing importance of medieval history, right? Here's what I'm getting out of this, right? Is that it's hard to argue that medieval history is important, because in some cases, you have to, really torture it to make a D, E, and I relevant. But on the other hand, if we don't, then we don't study medieval history, and then it gets picked up by the guys who are like, but Vikings were all white, and it gets, put down by the community of professional historians, and then authority is granted to those other communities. So that's it. So my argument for it is simply like, okay, this is important, right? It need not be a main focus, but we must pick it up and carry it forwards and fund this, because if we drop that ball, it's going to get picked up by somebody else and carried off someplace we don't like. Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense. Before I go, I owe the Ctruth patrons a huge thanks for their continued support in my endeavor to explore and map the world of chronology. So thank you all. Before you go, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and check out some of these other videos.